Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thinking Logically and Musically. My name is Takashi Ieda, a musician living in Japan. The purpose of this video and other videos that I'm planning on uploading is to explore music primarily from a logical and musical standpoint. Why? Despite the enormous amount of information available to us, such as historical documentation, writings by musicians or musicologists, recordings, etc. Um, there are hundreds of unresolved issues where we aren't sure what the composer wants to tell us through a certain indication in a piece of music. Yet we keep playing these pieces anyway, and in doing so, we allow ourselves to do things quite differently from what is written in the score, often in the name of interpretative freedom. On this channel, Thinking Logically and Musically, I would like to present examples where such unresolved issues find a solution to themselves through a logical and musical insight into what is happening in a piece of music and why it is happening exactly that way and not other ways. Of course, we have the freedom to think the way each of us think naturally, and that freedom should come from our knowledge, personality, experience, background, physical and mental conditions, etc., and not from ignorance. But for your interest, I should point out that what I'm placing emphasis on here is not the importance of playing music as it is written in the score, not at all, but rather the value of understanding what composers tried to tell us by means of the score. So in this video, we're going to explore Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, and specifically the introduction of its first movement, and see an example where a composer's indication in a piece of music that is often played with much freedom actually has a very specific meaning, and thus restricting and limiting the ways in which the music can be or may be rendered. So we have this violin solo in the introduction, and this is often played quite freely in terms of tempo, so that we perceive this part as being separate from both what is before and what comes after. The composer clearly indicates where he wants the tempo to change, and there should be a reason why he put the ritardando there and not elsewhere. To understand the reason, first of all, we almost have a clear idea of the overall structure of the entire first movement to understand the function of this violin solo or this introduction in relation to other sections of the movement. As with any form of art or literature, context is very important, it's crucial. So, first, let's have a look at the overall structure of the first movement in terms of tempo. It has three basic tempi. First, the allegro moderato of the introduction, for which the composer suggests a velocity of 126 beats per minute for a crotchet or quarter note. This is a rather lively tempo. Then let's skip the main body of the first movement and have a look at the coda at the end of the movement, which is marked allegro giusto. This also is a lively tempo. And between the two alto lively sections, we have the moderato assai section, which constitutes the main body of the first movement. Let's call it so. This moderato assai is a tempo with generous leeway to encompass considerable variation in tempo. For example, we have an indication to have a well-sustained tempo, or to temporarily add motion, or to drop the speed a bit. And we also have a substantial section in the middle of the movement where the tempo is molto sostenuto. Nevertheless, the tempo always returns to the basic moderato assai despite the many deviations. And I should like to point out that the initial tempo of the main body and the tempo of the first orchestral climax, which many of us are familiar with, it's very famous, isn't it? They are the same, both moderato assai. This is something quite obvious to those who are familiar with the score, but may not be so to those who only know the piece from what they have heard. The two moderato assai may not be identical, but it is reasonable to think that they are at least equivalent or corresponding, both representing the basic pace of the main body. And for this moderato assai, Tchaikovsky suggests the velocity of 80 bpm for a crotchet. Right, now that we have an idea, a vague idea of the overall structure of the movement, let's have a more detailed look at the introduction, which is our main topic today. So, the piece starts off with a lively tempo, and harmonically, nothing exceptional happens within the first 8 bars. The basic tonality is D major, and it transitions to the dominant A major. But from the next bar and up to and into the violin solo, the tonality is suddenly D minor, and constantly having the dominant A in the bass line and the dynamics rising, it gets more and more intense. And soon after, the dynamics increase to fortissimo, and the music reaches a highly intense point where the whole orchestra is united into the same rhythmic figure. Well, I'm sorry, I've cut out some parts of the score that did not fit in the screen. Then something quite extraordinary happens. Instead of making a gradual diminuendo, as many do, the dialogue between the winds, namely the flutes, oboes, and clarinets, and the strings in forte, steps down to mezzo forte, and this suddenly drops to piano. The winds also switch to the darker fagots and horns from the lighter flutes, oboes, and clarinets. Here, let's not overlook an often ignored fact that although many performers prefer to slow down along with the drop in dynamics, there's no indication to change the tempo in the score. And if we manage to reproduce what is written in the score, let's go back from this huge climax in fortissimo to this, then suddenly drop the dynamics to this without changing the lively tempo, then we have a very, how shall I say, drastic fall both dynamically and orchestration-wise, so that the drama that was created earlier with a gradual crescendo and reached fortissimo does not lose its intensity, but is actually reinforced by this drastic fall and handed over to what comes next, which is our beloved violin solo. In this solo part, I would like to once again draw your attention to where the composer wants the tempo to slow down. Here. Why is it here? Why is this ritenuto not introduced 3 or 4 bars earlier, as many do, when the dynamics drop? Well, people may have different opinions, and the following is my interpretation. As I said, the drama that reached a climax in fortissimo a few bars earlier, and that was reinforced by an equally dramatic downfall, is handed over to the violin solo, and the intensity is maintained by the violin solo. In order for this to happen, we should probably maintain the tempo, otherwise it will lose its intensity. And let's not forget that the tonality at the beginning of the solo is dominant of D minor, not D major. A lack of indication of dynamics at the violin's entrance may be intentional. It is actually so in the manuscript too. It may mean that the violin solo should start with the volume reached by the orchestra immediately before. So let's say relative piano. And we should note that where the ritardando is written coincides exactly with where the tonality starts to change from D minor to D major. If no obvious change in tempo is made before this ritardando, then this slowdown will feel like dissolution of the tension that has piled up all the way through to this point. This ritardando put down exactly in this place and not elsewhere reinforces my opinion that the intensity produced by the orchestra should be handed over to the violin solo, and that the tempo should not slow down along with the drop in dynamics from fortissimo to piano. And all these things lead us, or lead at least me, to the conclusion that the violin solo must be rendered and perceived as an integrated part of the Allegro moderato introduction. Well, this is something rather obvious when we look at the score, but is very seldom articulated so in actual performances. The violin solo is often perceived as some sort of a short cadenza separate from what happened before and what comes after. Well, to me, the composer's indications tell me that the violin solo as an integrated part of the introduction should lead the introduction to the moderato assai section both agogically and dynamically, gradually changing the mood towards the moderato assai section rather than being in an individual distinct mood. Do you remember that the first movement consists mainly of 3 sections, namely the 2 lively alto sections and the moderate main body, including the cadenza? Also, from the standpoint of presenting this 3-part form, it is crucial that the violin solo be integrated into the Allegro moderato introduction. If the solo is recognized as a separate section, then technically there will be 4 parts, and thus the 3-part form of the first movement will fall apart. Well, now I myself have a clear idea of how this violin should sound, the violin solo should sound, but well, I shall not allow myself to play it for you, and should rather leave it up to you. After all, what I'm trying to do in this video is to present what possibly was a fundamental concept the composer had in his mind when writing this concerto. Right, so this is actually all I have to say for this video. If you are interested, we could have a look at the entire first movement or entire concerto, but let's save that for another occasion. And instead, I should like to draw your attention to another often ignored feature of this concerto as a topic to discuss in relation to what we have been looking into. The second movement is a canzonetta, a little song, marked andante, and the composer suggests a velocity of 84 bpm per crotchet. Many performers seem to prefer a slower or a much slower tempo, especially from where the violin solo comes in. The actual speed, how fast or how slow it should be, may be arguable, but it is worth noting that the composer suggests a speed for the second movement that is actually faster than the main body of the first movement. Supposing that Tchaikovsky intentionally set the second movement to be somewhat faster than the first, why did he do so? What was his purpose? It should be a very interesting topic to talk about. I'm not sure, but the reason may be related to the fact that this canzonetta was substituted for the initial second movement, which, as we know, had a more individual, distinct character, but failed to serve the purpose of constituting the middle movement of this concerto. Right, so thank you very much for watching, and I hope this video can be of some use to initiate a discussion or perhaps bring someone a bit closer to the mind of the composer. Goodbye, and I hope to see you soon. Take care.